Marvel Rivals is about to introduce Professor X to the roster, and for some reason, this was the one announcement that actually made me want to play the game. Not really because I'm a huge X-Men fan or a Marvel fan in general, but it was for the simple fact that I would enjoy playing as his character. And that's because, as I've realized, I have a strong appreciation for characters who are bound to a wheelchair in storytelling, and I can't stand how underappreciated they are in media. If I were to be so bold, I think it is one of the best literary devices that a writer can use to exemplify character development, emotional weight, and unique interactions. Alright, this is a mighty claim, but allow me the chance to justify it by taking a look at some of my favorite characters from games, TV shows, and other media to show you why I personally really love this archetype and why you should appreciate it too. I suppose the first time I became aware of such a trope was in a series of games that's pretty nostalgic to me, Sly Cooper. This series is a third-person platformer that follows the journey of the radical raccoon Sly Cooper himself as he performs some of the master heists against criminal organizations. While the first game was relegated to only playing as Sly himself, the second game, Sly 2 Band of Thieves, introduced playing as his two accomplices, the huge hippo Murray and the tenacious turtle Bentley. And it's with Bentley that I had my first inclination towards this character trope. Sly 2 does wonders to build off the original cast, and arguably the one character that gets the most development is Bentley. Bentley goes from the guy in the chair to an active tactical participant in each heist. This involves his use of crossbows, sleep darts, bombs, and many other gadgets that help him to even the odds against enemies, and give him an enjoyable and stylized gameplay compared to the typical smash and bash of Sly and Murray. Bentley is given one of the most unexpected arcs, in which he barely evades arrest and must break his friends out of jail and learn to drive stick shift in the process. It is a truly heroic moment in gaming that really sticks out even 20 years later. Bentley is on a roll even before he's in a wheelchair, up until the point where he's wounded during the final fight due to a misstep from Murray. This results in his paralysis and the dissolution of the team at the end of the game, until it needs to be brought back together for the heist of the Cooper Vault in Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves. By Sly 3, enough time has passed to where Bentley has grown comfortable in his state of life and has developed new gameplay styles around his wheelchair. This was the first time I even considered someone to be more powerful and cooler than they were before because they were in a wheelchair. I suppose this comes from the fact that Bentley and Murray make amends and there's no ill will shown between them.
Listen, Murray, we need you back on the team. That thing with Bentley, it wasn't your fault. He doesn't blame you for the wheelchair.
It's quite tragic that Bentley, in his crippled state, is unable to drive the van ever again, though. This game is made for kids, of course, so it would be much longer before I'd see a more gritty and bitter example of this trope. See, with Bentley, he strives to make the most out of his life despite the physical limitations. And what works for this character is that the physical limitations don't impact his primary contribution to the team. He's always been the brains of the organization, so his physical status is a little less important. In a way, he returns to his role as the guy in the chair who can actually deliver in the field compared to before. And he even gets the girl at the end who is into the typical Chad character, but proves that the one in the wheelchair brings something special to the scene. And before you say, but what about what happened in Sly 4? Let's just ignore that. It's not a good game. As I aged, I started noticing more and more characters with this trope in media that I was consuming. From the comedic aspect, I had to look no further than Family Guy's Joe Swanson, voiced by the always incredible burly man himself, Patrick Warburton. Joe adds an element of false and fake tragedy given his paralysis occurs during a fight against the Grinch, which was later retconned to a more believable story, but it comes and goes on how he actually becomes crippled. What Joe shows with this trope is many comedic avenues writers can take when you see a character as explosive as Swanson being confined to a situation. I wouldn't say I've ever been the biggest Family Guy fan there was, but Joe has been my favorite character. Stellar voice acting plays a major part in why that is. Some of the best jokes land because it's making the most out of the situation he's in, constantly freaking out, which is by far the biggest part of his Family Guy Funny Moments compilations. But basic aspects of his character, like the ability to continue to be a cool cop despite his crippled state, point him to becoming a legend on the force. One might think this makes you less cool, but in my mind, characters like this are even cooler. While simple, it is effective. A trend in military stories is to deal with the aftermath of war, whether it be physical or mental. The hardships that soldiers endure are powerful and effective because soldiers sacrifice so much more than most of us ever will. In a more serious way, the introduction of a post-traumatic event can humble characters with hot personalities. We need look no further than Sergeant Frank Woods from Call of Duty Black Ops 2 or Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump. Both of these characters have similar backgrounds but tackle their lowest moments in different ways. stories. Let's start with Lieutenant Dan because this is a bit more condensed. Forrest Gump idealizes many of its depictions of history, but one thing it didn't pull punches on was the graphic and violent Vietnam War engagement. It's almost like you're actually watching an entirely different movie in that moment. Lieutenant Dan, who is introduced as someone laid back, is gravely injured and wants to accept the death of his bloodline, just like his forefathers did. When Forrest saves him, he's robbed of that glory and forced to live what seems to be an incomplete life. Lieutenant Dan can't even comprehend that Forrest understands what it feels like not to be able to walk or use her legs. I think that's profound because it shows that even when we're suffering from something, a tragic loss per se, something just as inherent to the human condition as being able to walk upright, unlike most other animals, is so important to us, and we flounder and struggle to find meaning and purpose without it. Through this lens, we can see the ups and downs of his situation, following him through the pits of despair, challenging God himself, and eventually leading him to be content with the cards he's been dealt. It contrasts so nicely with the obliviousness of Forrest to his situation, as many things in the movie do.
Magic legs.
What drives Lieutenant Dan's arc home is his recovery and acceptance that allow him to not only face his own hubris, but the consequences of what life throws at you. A perfect example is many people think life will go one way and have a dream that they work towards and focus on it. In his case, it was tragic, but some people feel a duty to their creator and ancestors. But the humbling experience of the wheelchair brings him back into reality, a reality that he doesn't control. Bitterness and resentment set in, but are ultimately cured through long periods of healing.
I never thanked you for saving my life.
With Lieutenant Dan, we see the healing over the course of the movie, but with Frank Woods, that process is a little detached from the main story. Throughout the entirety of Black Ops 1, Woods has your back. Sometimes you need the no-nonsense character who has some of the best quips and moments through the entire game, and that's just enough. The cool factor with him, off the charts, perfectly fitting for one of the most iconic characters from the series. He's a soldier who follows orders, even when questioning some. It seems like his character is totally untouchable, until...
Menendez!
When you begin Black Ops 2, Frank Woods is shockingly still alive, but this time crippled in a wheelchair. He's the arbiter of the missing story between himself, David Mason, and Raul Menendez. And clearly Woods, while still cracking jokes about Diet Pop, has an underlying trauma that hasn't been dealt with until the discussion between him and David about the mission in Panama. You can see cracks as he recollects about that night when Mason dies, allegedly.
The dead don't suffer. That's why you and I are still here.
Yet the entire time you still know he's the same Woods, but his development has taken a turn since the first game. The torture he was put through at the beginning of BO2 gave him the motivation to want to take down Menendez at all costs. An effective storytelling technique used in this game is shifting to Woods' perspective right before his ability to walk is taken away. It puts the player in his boots when you witness losing your own 2 feet, and truly makes you helpless when you're typically a guns-a-blazing hero. Taking away the ability of a player to walk and move in a situation is shocking when you're forced to just let all of the cards fall where they may. You can't protect Alex, David, or Hudson. You're just left to suffer with them, which continues to suffer with Menendez until the very end, depending on how you've played the game, which will determine the conclusion of his story, if he will eventually recover from his obsession or be fully consumed by it. Not all wheelchair stories have to start tragically and end dramatically, which takes us to L.B. Jeffries from Rear Window. Rear Window is a phenomenal and creative movie that makes the most out of confined space to discover the ethical dynamics of relationships that people have in said spaces.
Jeff, if you could only see yourself.
What's the matter?
Sitting around looking out of the window to kill time is one thing, but doing it the way you are with binoculars and wild opinions about every little thing you see is disease.
What do you think I'd consider it recreation?
Jeff himself is a photographer placed in a wheelchair due to his own ambition getting the best of him. Grabbing the best photo on the racetrack led to the accident, but thankfully, it's not permanent. At the start of the movie, he's but 1 week away from getting into crutches, but his chair and large apartment window set the stage for a murder mystery to be uncovered. Jeff's inquisitiveness is not hindered by his physical situation. His drive for adventure wants him to constantly leap out of his chair. It does show that curiosity is not a virtue, but a slippery slope in into uncovering information that he wasn't supposed to be privy to, as he delves deeper into trying to prove that Lars Thorwald actually killed his wife. In this story, he takes the ultimate man-in-the-chair role to witness various lives of his neighbors in their apartment complexes. This is all enhanced by Jimmy Stewart's excellent performance, which is a far cry from his more recognizable role in It's a Wonderful Life. Some lines sound just like George Bailey, which is pretty funny to think about because his character in movie is significantly more of a Casanova and pragmatist. Helplessness can be exasperated by removing a character's ability to walk, as I mentioned before. Thorwald is, through a series of deceitful tactics, led away from his apartment, giving Lisa and Stella a chance to inspect the sus garden. After nothing is found, Lisa goes to the murderer's room to find evidence of the crime, but Thorwald quickly arrives home and catches her in the act. Jeff called the police, but he's just left to sit there and watch, as the love of his life might have her neck snapped, like the poor little dog from earlier. There's a moment where the lights go out in the apartment, and Jeff, with you, the audience, are left to mentally fill in the blanks of what's happening. Helplessness is exasperated by making the character stationary in this whole interaction. Jeff's reaction to seeing Lisa nearly killed is heart-wrenching as he's gripping his neck, imagining what's happening to her. The police eventually find Lisa in his apartment and arrest her, but not after she steals the single piece of evidence corroborating Thorwald. He realizes it and sets his sights on Jeff, understanding he's been watched the entire time. Jeff realizes this and tries to take a stand, but can't, so resorts to backing himself into a corner of his dark room for a last stand. Or I guess I should say last sit. As Thorwald walks towards him in the shadows, Jeff uses the bulb flashes of his camera to stun his attacker, reloading them as if they were rounds in a weapon. This gives him barely enough time for the investigators to arrive and save him, but the dramatic tension increases throughout the sheer standoff of these two characters. And we've talked a lot about different characters who deal with handicaps in different ways. As a lightning round, some other unmentioned characters that come to mind are Nessa Rose from Wicked, Jake Sully from Avatar, Dr. Strangelove from Dr. Strangelove, and of course, Professor X from X-Men. However, there is one character that I believe sits above all the rest as the true wheelchair Chad. The one that encapsulates everything I've been talking about in this video and brings it to the next level. A man who struggled against family, friends, and the weight of an entire nation to go on the path to learn to figuratively and literally walk again. That character is Johnny Joestar from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Part 7, Steel Ball Run. To answer what makes Johnny Joestar the pinnacle of wheelchair characters, we need to understand the context in which he was created. The Steel Ball Run is an alternate universe from the previous parts of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, in which characters from the original series are recontextualized into different versions of themselves to tell a story based on the original parts 1 through 3. Looking at the characters in the story, Jonathan Joestar becomes the primary inspiration for Johnny, but there's a great departure from the super muscular macho man aesthetic. Johnny is confined to a wheelchair because he essentially got too cocky, thinking he's so much better than everyone else. This comes from a deep-seated trauma that his own father instilled in him. Johnny's development comes primarily through being knocked down over and over again, and is physically represented in his stand, Tusk. This exemplifies why Johnny has one of the best written arcs of any JoJo characters. Not only does he have moments like the Soundman in Civil War arc to solidify himself in JoJo greatness, but the opportunities give him the chance to develop way beyond what other characters in the series had. The different acts of Tusk show Johnny's development as a character and how he reacts to certain threats of losing people closest to him. Soundman draws Johnny to the golden ratio as Gyro relies on him to capture the power of the spin. Conversely, Civil War puts Johnny in a dramatic disadvantage emotionally, as we're given a glimpse into his backstory and survivor's guilt. Yet, through a massive divine revelation, he's able to overcome even the physical limitations, as Tusk Act 3 allows him to traverse in ways he hadn't been able to before. If you've ever played JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, All-Star Battle, or Eyes of Heaven, Johnny's gameplay is certainly unique. This is because he has ranged attacks with his nail bullets, which are powerful, yet his movement is slow and lackluster, which is pretty in place for the original manga. Seeing a paraplegic ride a horse is quite inspiring, showing that even when Johnny is crippled, he's still immensely competent at doing the one thing he's good at, writing. Johnny, through the entirety of Steel Ball Run, constantly pushes back against all adversities. Tenacity is something that grows along with his personal relationships and skill set during the race. This all comes to a head when he unlocks the full potential of the spin, awakening Tusk Act 4, using the infinite rotation to break through all dimensional barriers. Seeing a character whose at first appearance looks looked so derpy and non-threatening become one of the most powerful characters in the entire series, along with constant development and growth physically, mentally, and spiritually. This is a true message of hope. Johnny is a character that's a bit of a jerk, but a good chunk of the part still manages to make him endearing. It's not hard to feel sorry for him, and they don't use the wheelchair to make you feel sorry for him. But like with all other characters previously mentioned, he goes beyond even what they do. As I mentioned, Steel Ball Run is a story of a man learning to walk again. His ambitions at the start are shallow and hollow, but by meeting his best friend, Gyro Zappelli, he's able to care about things beyond himself. And by the end of the manga, he's able to stumble along with a walking stick, showing physically his recovery that was made in pursuit of the corpse parts. As Johnny is putting these pieces of the corpse together, he's putting himself back together in a way. Integrating himself into the golden ratio for Tusk Act 4 is the ultimate symbol of this, brilliantly capturing that despite his self-inflicted nerf, this man has gone through the worst of it and come out the other side. I've made a video on this topic before, but my favorite quote from all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure comes from Gyro's Lesson 5 to Johnny. The shortest path was the detour. There's something interesting mathematically about Lagrangian mechanics that make my physicist ears perk up when thinking about this, but putting that aside, this signifies Johnny's journey learning to walk again. The wheelchair to Johnny is one giant detour on this path, not only to racing glory, but to self-recovery. Losing the ability to walk for so many people may seem like a detour on the path they've been set on, but how you deal with that suffering can prove if it's sanctifying or not. And with this quote, I see many aspects of this in my own life. So that brings us to the final question: why make this video in the first place? And to answer that, I may need to get a little personal. Wheelchairs tend to make people recognize and respect what they have in ways that are difficult to understand for someone who's not closely related to that situation. At the end of 2023, I had to make a very difficult decision, as someone very important to me was crippled very badly by circumstances I don't feel I need to elaborate on. While I didn't know if this person would ever walk again, I knew I needed to be there for them. I left my job, my relationships, and everything at a moment's notice to take care of them, and it dramatically affected not only how I conduct myself in my life, but the contents I share on this channel as well. Some of you may notice it's a little different than stuff I had been making a few years ago. That's because this channel was on a bit of a detour to where I thought it was going to be going. In a sense, this video is a tribute to that person, someone I had to care for while they were in a wheelchair, someone who means the world to me, someone who is, by the grace of God, not only still alive, but is actually walking again in a limited capacity. I've been so touched by this character archetype because it means something deeply personal to me. I couldn't imagine a world where I couldn't go for a run. I couldn't imagine having my ability to freely move be so hindered. But the very impactful life experience I've been through, and these characters, give me so much more respect for what I do have as a human being. So those have been my thoughts on this archetype, the wheelchair Chad. If anything, I think this character archetype is really interesting and enhances more characters than hurts them. I think it's one form of diverse inclusion that can be used for better storytelling, because in many cases it's not intrinsically inherent to these characters. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I've really wanted to share this for a long time and thought that this was the best way to do it and also keep it interesting. I have a few other ideas that I want to cover this year, but given my work schedule, please wait. There's only so much I can edit. I hope you stay to see the you that I keep putting into YouTube each and every day as I talk about these things I like. God bless, and I'll see you all later.